Hi, I'm Heather Peltier with Education Foundations. Welcome to video 2 in our Microsoft Excel for Educators series, using a V-Lookup formula to combine two files. In this video series, we show you how to use conditional formatting to do some data cleaning on your file, how to use V-Lookup formula to combine two files, and how to use pivot tables to create intervention groups to answer the question, how can I identify grade 5 students for intervention groups in Earth Space Science based on their performance on a progress monitoring assessment? If you like this video, please take a moment and click the thumbs up icon below. In case you missed the first video of the series, I'll just do a quick recap of the activity. In this activity, we have 5 teachers and 110 students, and the teachers want to do a cross-classroom intervention activity for the students. These students all participated in a science progress monitoring assessment that reports out domain level subscores as low, low average, average, high average, and high. For this activity, we play the role of an instructional coach who has agreed to help the teachers group the students based on their performance on this progress monitoring test. We have 2 files that we're going to use for this activity, and you can find the link to the folder where you can download them in the video description. The first file is Science Teacher Assignments, which has a list of the student IDs, student names, and the teacher to whom they're normally assigned for science instruction. And the second file is Student Science Data, which again has the student IDs, student names, this time has their progress monitoring scores, but doesn't have any teacher information. So for this activity, we're going to be combining these 2 files using the V-Lookup formula. And I've already done some data cleaning in video 1 on each of these files to make sure that we don't have any duplicate student IDs that would interfere with the effectiveness of our V-Lookup formula. So let's get started. Our sub-question for this video will be, how do we combine 2 files to create one master student data file that has all the information that we need to group students for interventions? The first part of this process is using V-Lookup to combine our 2 files. V-Lookup is just one way in Excel to combine information from 2 different files using a unique identifier, but the key here is having that unique identifier value. It must be unique in order for it to return the correct information. So in our first video in this series, we showed how to check and make sure that the files you're using have no duplicate student IDs. I'm now using the cleaned version of these files for this second activity. When you're doing this activity with your files, I strongly encourage you to check the files that you're merging before beginning a V-Lookup, using the process that we showed you in video 1. So now I have my 2 files, and they both have a unique record identifier of student ID. We're going to use that ID to match the records in both files. So basically what V-Lookup does is it goes to each student ID in the first file, then asks the second file if it contains any data attached to that same student ID. If the answer is no, it won't return anything, and you'll get an NA message. If the answer is yes, it will bring the data that's tied to that specific student ID over to the first file. I told you that the first important consideration for V-Lookup is that you need to have unique identifiers. The second important consideration is that these identifiers need to be the first variable in each file, which means that first column. So again, there are some caveats to this, but for purposes of keeping it simple here, the best thing to do is to make sure that your first column in both files contains your student ID. The reason for this is that Excel reads like we do. It will start in the left-hand column and move to the right. Once it finds a field you're matching on, which is student ID, it will keep looking to the right for information that can bring into the first file. Because of this, it's really important that your student ID be on the far left column, or column A, for any files that you're trying to match using that variable. We wanted to show you how to clean a file that wasn't in this format. So the student science data file, as you can see, has student ID in the second column, column B. Before we can begin doing V-Lookup, we need to just move this over to column A instead. This is very easy. Just click on that letter B to select the entire column, then right-click and select Cut. Now, select column A by clicking on letter A at the top of that column, right-click, and select Insert Cut Cells. You'll now see that those student IDs jumped over from column B to column A, and everything else in the file slides over one column to make room for it. So we now have our two files ready to match. Because it's possible that both files will not be an exact match, so they may not have the exact same kids. For example, some students may not have taken the progress monitoring test, and so may not appear on the test data file, but they do have class assignments, and they might appear on that teacher file. So we need to decide which is the primary file we're working from. In other words, is it more important to us to see all the kids with science progress monitoring test scores and to bring in their teacher assignments? Or is it more important to see all the kids by teacher and to bring in their test data? This answer will depend on the question you're asking. In this example, my question is, how can I identify grade 5 students for intervention groups in earth-space science based on their performance on a progress monitoring test? But if a student doesn't have a progress monitoring test, I still want that student to end up in a group. They can't just be left out of instruction that day. So the science teacher assignments file, which has all the students, will be my primary file, and I'm going to bring in these progress monitoring scores into that file. I've opened up the science teacher assignments file, and now I'm going to create a column header for the progress monitoring data that I'm going to bring in. I'll put this into column F. And because this is specifically an earth-space science activity, those are the scores I want to bring in. Now I'm going to click on the first cell, which would have student data, which is cell F2. You can see Excel identifies a cell using the column and the row combination, and it'll display here. So we're in F2. I've done all the data cleaning, so this is the easy part, and Excel is going to help me by giving me the formula and telling me what to put into each component. In cell F2, I'll type in equals V-Lookup, open parentheses, and you can see it populates within here a list of what it's looking for. The first thing it's looking for is what's called the lookup value. That's my unique identifier that I want to use. It's over here in cell A2, so if I just click in A2, you can see that it populates for me. Now I have my unique lookup value from my primary file, and next it's asking for my table array, which is where should it go to find that match. So I put a comma here, just like they asked me to do. And I'm now going to click over to my second file, which is where it will look it up, the student science data file. And beginning with column A, which has my student ID. Remember, it's important to begin with student ID, which is what I'm matching on. I'll highlight all of the columns in this file. The other thing I have to do here is notice which column is the information I want to bring in. So in my case, I already have student ID, name, and teacher in my teacher assignments file. What I'm interested in bringing in here is that subscore data for Earth and Space Science. I can see a pop-up box showing me here 8C, which tells me this is the 8th column. If I count, I can also see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's the value within the 8th column that I want to return. So now I've highlighted my columns within the science data file. I go back to my science teacher assignment, and you can see it showing the name of that file that I jumped into, student science data. I put a comma and the number 8 because I want the 8th column to get returned. Now I type in another comma, and it asks me, do I want true, an approximate match, or false, an exact match? False tells it to only give me a value if Excel finds an exact match to my student ID. And I don't want it bringing in data that may or may not match my student ID, so I will always type in false here. Then close parentheses and hit enter. And I can see right away that it's populated the value of the Earth Space Science Progress Monitoring test scores here. Juliana Applewhite is in Craig's class and received a progress monitoring score of average on the Earth Space Science subdomain. I've got her information all in one place. To populate this formula down to the rest of the rows here, all I do is mouse over the bottom right-hand corner of cell F2, where I enter my formula, and I look for that black plus sign. Once I get that black plus sign that you can see here, I double click, and it will auto-populate the formula all the way down my rows. Now I look finished, but I'm not quite done because I have one more thing that I have to do. This formula is telling Excel to look into that student science data file to find this information. But when I open up this, which is now my master file, I don't want to always have to open up the student science data file so that Excel can find that info. So instead, I'm just going to click on column header F to highlight that entire column, right click, copy, and then once I've done that, I right click again and I choose paste as values, which is the clipboard with a 1, 2, 3. And I can see now my formulas are gone. And when I click in here, it just has these student scores. Now I can open up this file by itself from now on without worrying about anything funky happening because there was an embedded formula. The last thing I want to point out is you may have some students who are present in your master file, which in this case is your teacher assignment file, that weren't appearing on your second file, your scores file. There was nothing for Excel to return because it couldn't find the student ID in the referrals file. So you'll see a hashtag NA here. So for example, if we go down and you look here at student Carmela Martinez, you're going to see that is the case for her. This is not an error. This is Excel correctly pointing out to you that Carmela does not exist in that student scores file, so there's no value it can bring in. She must not have taken that progress monitoring test. In our next video in this series, we'll show you how to use this merge file to create a pivot table to build out those student information groups. Thanks for watching our second video in our series on Excel for Educators. If you like this video and want to learn more about how to use Excel specifically for your role as an educator, whether it's a teacher, instructional coach, testing coordinator, guidance counselor, or a school or district level administrator, we would love to have you join us in our online course, Excel for Coaches and Educational Leaders. Thanks so much for watching.